Yes, I know I'm in a different spot. Deal with it. On Easter Sunday, we had the Fabio Wardley and Fraser Clarke boxer card. It was a very good event. The 3 fights I've seen, I've only seen the 3 which I'm going to talk about in this video, which were Ben Whittakes' fight, Viddal Riley's fight against Mikel Lawal. I know I said his name wrong. Sorry, I've just said it wrong again. Mikel Lawal. I know I said it wrong in his last video. None of you corrected me. I've corrected myself. I was just getting very annoyed when I heard them say it a lot on the broadcast, and it wasn't the way I said it. And of course, the main event, the heavyweights, a draw in the end. I'm going to give what I think the result was, how I scored it, what I think is next for them two. Spoiler, I think it's a rematch. And how I think both fighters can go into that rematch with a chance of winning, as well as what's next for the other fights on the card. So let's start with the main event. Going into this, I hadn't watched an awful lot of either of them. I'm going to be honest. I was mainly watching this card for Viddal's fight. But, of course, this was the main event. So I feel like I need to talk about it. And also, Ben Whittakes is another, influential figure in this sort of boxer promotion. And I guess sort of the UK boxing scene right now. He has blown up recently with his in-ring antics and his skill, his showboating, etc. So that's why I'm going to talk about these 3. So starting off with the main event, first 3 rounds, to me, it was apparent that Fraser Clarke was a significantly better boxer. And as much as I gave him all 3 the first round, they were very close. And he, I think it's in the second round, he initially opens up Wardley's nose, which, played a massive factor later into the round. They had to get the doctor in to check it out midway through. I believe it was the 10th, but it might have been the 9th or 11th, but I'm not even sure it was the 10th. Someone has just turned a saw on of some sort, so if you can hear that, I apologise. So talking about that fight, going through it, it seemed very much like at the beginning with Clarke's more orthodox, shall we say, more traditional boxing style. I just felt like he would improve later into the fight, and especially with winning the 3 rounds at the beginning, for me at least, I felt like he would have enough to go on and win this fight in the end. And credit to Wardley, he grew into the fight, and that sort of unorthodox, a bit more wild, with the overhands, the hooks, both hands. There was kind of some, what felt like accidental stance switching and sort of just reactionary punching, I guess. I feel like that kind of caught Clarke off guard in a couple of occasions, especially with, a lot of times, he would miss with his backhand and throw it again, a lot of times as an overhand, and then it would almost be sort of just like a backhand kind of situation, which he got warned on later in the fight, which I didn't know was an illegal shot, actually. I figured you could, it just is quite an obvious shot. But when he throws the overhand and it misses and he switches it up to that, he caught Fraser a couple times with that, and I think that's just because Fraser was not expecting it, because it's not a very traditional boxing thing. For me, whenever it was a skill-for-skill boxing match, Fraser was getting the best of Fabio. Then whenever it was a bit more cagey, a bit more wild, initially it seemed like they were both relatively even, and then later into the fight it seemed like Fabio Wardley was significantly getting the best of him in those areas. For me, when the final, I thought Fabio won it, personally. I thought he won it just about by a couple points, especially with the knockdown and the points deduction. I thought Fabio won it, but I do think going into a rematch, I would put money on Fraser Clarke, purely because he is, in my opinion, even after seeing him for 12 rounds, the better boxer, and I think he will be able to find the holes, which are quite obvious when you're watching, but with that kind of unorthodox, wild skill set that Wardley has, it's hard to implement it, especially the first time you're ever fighting him. So let's talk about, first of all, the knockdown. That comes from, obviously these two both hit hard. I think Fabio probably hits a bit harder, obviously, because he went down more, but that could have also just been on how clean he got it, where he got it on. But for me, in that exchange when he goes down, obviously I'm assuming that he was hurt quite bad. The fact that he was just looking to cover up and to survive that point and stay on his feet, and then it's the final shot that's a little bit delayed. It's almost like a lead right hand, like an accidental stance switch that puts him down. So for me, there were a lot of these moments in the fight, including the knockdown, where Fabio Wardley was just loading up on punches, swinging, a bit wild, a bit erratic, a lot of overhands, a lot of hooks, and a lot of times it did look like his hands were sort of quite low and he was quite exposed. And for me, going into a rematch, as Clarke, after rewatching this fight many times, as he will do if he's preparing for a rematch, I think they're his best opportunities to put Wardley down. And I know it takes a lot of self-belief and bravery and experience to know when to do that, but I think he's got that, and he he hits hard as we've seen, and also maybe going to the body a bit more because you to do that sort of style you're moving a lot, Wardley that is, so maybe take him to the body can minimise the effect he had. Wardley was going to the body a lot more from memory. He did have some thudding body hooks. So yeah, for me, the knockdown comes from this sort of chaotic, wild exchange where Clarke's hurt and Wardley wants to get him out of there. And for me, in the rematch, that is Frazer Clarke's best opportunity to put Wardley down. And if that happens early, and he does go down, maybe then Wardley gets a bit more cautious about going into these exchanges, or gets hurt and gets more cautious about going into these exchanges. And therefore, that for me is Wardley's best opportunity to win the fight, is making it as wild and chaotic as possible. Because in the pocket, especially after sort of the knockdown after round 5, whenever there was in the pocket exchanges, I felt like Wardley was getting the better of Clarke consistently. Before the knockdown, I thought it was quite even. Obviously, he had quite a wider guard, Wardley, and Clarke was coming with some uppercuts and some straights, which obviously the wider guard leaves you more exposed to those sort of shots. So if he can implement that to a bit more effect, maybe throwing a bit more, maybe putting more behind them in the rematch, that's another opportunity for him. The point deduction, I will say, I know the ref sort of does this, gestures 3 fingers, sort of suggesting, I've warned you 3 times, now I'm going to take a point away. I can only remember 2 times he warned him. And the shot, to me, it wasn't like a thudding body shot that was low. It was on the belt line. His belt line was relatively low compared to, certain boxers who will have him right up, sort of, up to the top of their abs almost, to put pressure on decisions when shots are going lower. So to me, I think that was a bit harsh to minus a point at that point, especially how close the fight was, although you can't really take into account closeness of the fight in terms of deducting a point. It should 100% just be if you do something that breaks the rules, you lose a point. But to me, I think that's another warning. You give Wardley a bit of time to recover, and then if it happens again, for me, that's when you take the point away. Especially because it clearly wasn't, to me at least, wasn't an intentional shot, and it wasn't a particularly damaging shot. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, whether you think that deduction was harsh, whether you thought it was the correct decision or not. But let's talk about the rematch, which is probably what is next for both of these guys. Or it may be, if not next, it's something that will happen in the future. For me, as I've said, I think Clarke, it would go into this fight being maybe not the favourite, considering that Wardley is the champion, but for me, I think he's got the best shot. He's got a better shot of winning. When you're in, we've heard a lot of people talk about just elite level boxers sparring lower level opposition and fighting lower level opposition. When they don't do the things that you're expecting, the things that have been drilled into you and into people of your sort of level boxing skill wise, when they don't do them things, it can take you off guard. And when you look at Tyson Fury against Deontay Wilder, it's a bit different, I will admit, because Tyson Fury is obviously a much better boxer than Clarke. Deontay Wilder is better than Wardley, granted. Maybe not as a boxer, but as a competitor. And then also when you consider the fact that Fury grew into that fight, whereas Wardley was the one who grew into that fight. I know that. When you look at that fight, after Fury had been in there with him, he knew immediately, this is what I have to do to beat him. And he went away, he got a new coach, he learnt that style, and he did it twice, and won twice by finish. So when you're looking at that, I think Clarke will watch this fight back and say, here's where I succeeded, and here's where I struggled. But if I do this where I struggled, I won't struggle as much. And if I can maximise doing where I succeeded at the most, I will win this fight. And I think it is, for someone of both their style, easier for Clarke to impose his game on Wardley than Wardley on Clarke. I do believe that. If you're Wardley, looking for that, first thing you got to do, I think, is make sure your conditioning is better than it was this time. Obviously, a large part of that could be the nose injury. It's hard. It would be probably impossible to breathe out your nose at that point, so he's only blowing through his mouth and etc. etc. So fair enough, that could help. That could hinder your conditioning. But for me, make sure you're as conditioned, but realistically more conditioned than Clarke. Watch out for the straights and the uppercuts, so keep your guard a bit tighter, your defence a bit better. But try and make it as chaotic as a fight as possible, because he sort of thrived in that fight, when it was a lot of just throwing hammers and hitting and who's landing cleaner and stuff. That's where he was getting the better of Clarke, and that's for me why I thought he won the fight, because there were more, especially in the second half of the fight, of those exchanges where he was getting the better of Clarke. So that's my opinion on that fight. Next, I want to go to the Ben Whittaker fight. I'm going to touch on this quite quickly because I don't feel like we really learned much else about Ben Whittaker. If I'm being honest, that's not a critique of him or of the fight. I feel like it's just kind of, we know he's got some slick upper body movement. He is hard to hit. He did get hit a couple times, quite flush, quite clean, and he didn't really seem to phase him, so maybe we've learned sort of how good his chin is to a degree. He was landing a lot of clean shots. I don't think the power really phased Leon. It was more so the speed and the accuracy and the variation, especially. He went to the body a lot. There's a lot of 1-2s, a lot of straight, clean, technical boxing. And of course, you know, with Ben Whittaker, you're getting some showmanship, you're getting some showboating, you're getting a show with Ben Whittaker. We all know that. So it was another good performance for him. I think probably a step up next is needed. Someone who will put it on him a bit more, and we can really see how evasive he can be, and if he can keep up the showboating in that next level, and maybe he sticks at that level for a bit and moves up again, or maybe he just moves straight up again. We don't know. But overall, good fight for him. Another win, going through the gears. Next, the fight I was looking forward to the most, Viddal Riley defending his English title against the former British title holder, Lawal. To me, you know, obviously watching this before you learn that he, I believe, fractured his rib in the very first round with a body shot, obviously. To me, I thought he could have potentially stayed in the pocket a bit more. Obviously, he was very worried. He's a heavy-handed opponent. He's very, I don't know if worried is the right word, but conscious that he could get dropped. He's never been dropped as a pro before. I think he said he's never been stopped, or he might have said he's never been dropped as an amateur either. In the press leading up to this, but either way, you know, he wants to maintain that record and that streak, and of course, it was a very dominant, good boxing display, very quick, very accurate. Did get caught a couple times as well. What was really sort of on display was his conditioning and his speed, his footwork. It seemed a little bit Usyk versus AJ in terms of just slipping out, moving a lot, throwing more punches, landing more. Not as much volume as Usyk does, and probably harder shots, but you know, still a very dominant, clear, you won this fight performance. The next step for him is that Chamberlain fight. Whether or not Chamberlain has a fight before him is, you know, up to the promotion and up to the mandatory he has. Obviously, to me, that's the fight that needs to happen next. I will back Viddal to win that fight, but it is, again, another very interesting fight. Viddal is going through the gears. Obviously, he did lose quite a bit of time in his sort of early career. He turned pro quite young. I believe he was 20, 21 when he turned pro. And then he has, I believe, 3 fights. Then he takes a break for his coaching side, helping the YouTubers, his mates. Then, boom, COVID. Then injuries. I know he had visa issues. And he has had a few more injuries as well. And maybe, you know, this fractured rib means he's out for so long that Chamberlain takes his mandatory and then goes on to fight him. That's probably what's going to happen now. Now I think about it, because he did post a vlog the day afterwards of the whole thing, the whole fight. He's immediately before, immediately after, and the doctor there basically said, you'll be fine, but it kind of just has to heal itself and it will take a while. How long? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how fractured ribs heal. He is stepping up pretty much every fight now since both his Nice Taj fights. That was a step up from the last guy. Then he steps up to English level, former British level. Now he's stepping up against the British level. And then it's sort of, where do you go from there? Do you defend the British belt for a couple fights? Do you move on to European? That's probably where he'll go next, European, and then maybe start taking on some title contenders or people in and around title contenders, because he obviously, as pretty much every boxer will, is hunting that world championship fight. And there's a lot of good cruiserweights right now, especially English cruiserweights as well, in that scene. And you know, it is a hard division for you to win a title in, but he's obviously got the confidence, the self-belief, and I believe he has the skills to become a world champion eventually. So that was my opinion on the card. Let me know yours in the comments down below. I've got 3 other videos already out. I got recently posted one about Conor McGregor, posted a review of UFC 299 and a review of the Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou fight, as well as soon, because I believe UFC 300 is in April. Soon I will have my prediction video for that one. I'm imagining that's going to be quite a long video considering how many great fights are on that card. And I'll give you my full sort of opinions on that in that video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.